The rain turned the city into a blur of neon and grime, streets slick with secrets and danger. Cassius moved through the alleys like a shadow, every step measured, every eye trained on what could strike first. Hunger clawed at him, fear sharpened him, but tonight, instinct demanded something more. A boy cornered, a threat looming, and Cassius acted before thinking, a knife flashing, blood mixing with rain. From the darkness, a figure emerged, impeccably dressed, calm, commanding. Not cruel, but powerful. "You've got instinct," the man said, voice low and precise. "Most kids in your position would be dead. You didn't. That means something." For the first time, fear mingled with awe. The man offered a choice: survival, yes, but survival with purpose. Skills, strategy, control. Cassius hesitated, the rain washing grime from his face but not from his heart, then whispered, almost in disbelief, "Teach me." And just like that, the world shifted. The gutters and alleys no longer felt permanent. For the first time, fire alone wasn't enough, but guided, honed, it could become something unforgettable. Cassius had taken the first step toward a life where instinct met instruction, and survival became power. If you're hooked and enjoying the story, please like the video and hit subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I've got so many incredible stories coming your way, and you definitely don't want to miss any of them. Alright, let's get back to the story. The rain-slicked streets of the city were a blur of neon and grime, the kind of place where survival was measured in scraps and stolen moments. Cassius moved through the alleys like a shadow, his clothes ragged, shoes half-soled, knuckles raw from fights he had barely won. Hunger gnawed at him, sharp and relentless, but he hardly noticed it anymore. Hunger was a constant companion. Fear was another. Both were teachers, shaping his reflexes, sharpening his instincts. Tonight, he had made a mistake, or maybe it was courage, depending on how the world chose to remember it. He had seen a man corner a boy half his size near one of the warehouses, demanding money, rough hands threatening, sneering. Cassius had lunged before thinking, a knife flashing in the dim light, catching the man off guard long enough to shove the boy to safety. It hadn't ended cleanly. Cassius had taken a gash across his forearm, blood mixing with the rain, and the man had vanished into the night, swearing revenge. He had no idea who he was really tangling with. He only knew he had done the right thing, or at least, what his small, brutal world called right. The sound of footsteps behind him froze him in place. Heavy, measured steps, not hurried. He turned, knife ready, chest heaving. A man emerged from the shadows, impeccably dressed, yet there was an aura around him, something that suggested command without effort. Cassius felt the weight of it immediately. Every instinct in his body screamed both threat and opportunity. "You've got instinct," the man said, voice low and smooth, carrying authority without arrogance. "Most kids in your position would have run, or cried, or been dead by now. You didn't." Cassius blinked, unsure if he should attack or retreat. The man didn't move, didn't threaten further, simply studied him, eyes cold but not cruel. What do you want?" Cassius spat, more defiance than courage. He was tired of begging for scraps, tired of being invisible. "I want to show you something," the man said. "I can teach you the rest. How to survive, how to strike without fear, how to make the world pay attention when you walk into a room. You've got fire in you, but fire alone doesn't last. Skill matters. Strategy matters. Timing." He stepped closer, and for the first time, Cassius saw the weight behind the words, not just power, but principle. This wasn't a man who used cruelty for fun. This was a man who understood it and wielded it with precision. Cassius lowered his knife, his arm throbbing, rain running down his face, washing the grime from his cheeks, but not from his heart. The fear that had always driven him was still there, but now it mingled with something new. Awe. "Teach me," he whispered, almost unable to believe he had said it. The man nodded once, faintly, almost approvingly. "Good. That's all I needed to hear. You'll learn fast, or you'll die. But I think you'll do well." For the first time in his life, Cassius felt the thrill of possibility, a spark of something bigger than survival. The gutters and alleys didn't seem so permanent now. There was a path out, and it had just appeared before him in the form of this imposing, enigmatic figure who could see what no one else ever had. And just like that, the boy who had lived on scraps and fists took the first step toward a world he didn't yet understand. A world where instinct met instruction, and fire could be honed into something deadly and unforgettable. The days blurred into nights, each one a lesson wrapped in sweat, blood, and whispered secrets. Cassius learned quickly, his instincts sharpened by necessity, now guided by method. Alaric moved through the warehouse with a quiet authority, demonstrating how to read a room before a single word was spoken, how a pause could be sharper than a blade. Cassius watched, memorizing every shift of weight, every calculated glance, every unspoken rule that governed their world. Violence was taught with precision. Alaric never glorified it, never let it slide into brutality for its own sake. When Cassius hesitated in a street confrontation, Alaric's hand on his shoulder was firm, not cruel. "Control," he said. "The world reacts to those who decide when and how it bends. You don't break it out of anger. You break it because it must bend, and only when you choose the moment." Negotiation was no less ruthless. Cassius learned to speak softly and let others reveal their weaknesses, to tempt greed, to manipulate alliances. Alaric watched him fail once or twice, correcting a tone, a gesture, a glance, until the lessons were ingrained, unstoppable. With each success, Cassius grew, not just in skill, but in confidence, in presence. He became someone people noticed before he spoke, someone whose silence carried weight. There were moments that went beyond strategy and survival. Alaric would pull Cassius aside after a long day, handing him a glass of whiskey, a rare gesture of trust. "You've got fire, but fire burns everything around it if you don't learn restraint," he would say, and for a moment, they were no longer boss and protege, but something closer to father and son, a bond forged in the crucible of shared danger. Cassius found himself wanting to live up to that quiet faith, craving not just approval, but the rare warmth that came with it. Other capos began to take notice. Some watched with suspicion, resentful of the boy who seemed to rise effortlessly under Alaric's gaze. Others respected him, noting the precision of his decisions, the loyalty he inspired, the calm that belied his years. Cassius carried himself differently now. His presence was deliberate, measured, commanding without demanding. The moment of recognition came in the glow of the office, Alaric standing before his assembled captains. Cassius, calm and composed, had handled a tense negotiation with a rival family, preventing bloodshed and asserting their influence simultaneously. Alaric's eyes lingered on him, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "This man," he said, voice carrying through the room with unassailable authority, "has learned more than I could have imagined. He understands strategy, loyalty, and the cost of power better than most I've known. This man is the future." Cassius felt a swell of pride, tempered with humility, but also a strange, unspoken weight. The praise was intoxicating, yet it carried a quiet burden. Expectations, responsibilities, and the first whispers of a destiny far larger than the streets he had once roamed. And as Alaric placed a hand on his shoulder, Cassius knew he had entered a world where he no longer survived merely to live. He survived to become something more, something dangerous, something unforgettable. The room smelled of cigars and old wood, the kind of air that carried authority like a weight pressing against your chest. Alaric stood at the head of the long table, his eyes scanning the captains, assessing loyalty and fear in equal measure. Cassius sat near the center, hands folded, feeling the familiar tension of the room, the subtle hierarchies, the unspoken rules, the power humming just beneath the surface. Tonight was different. Alaric's gaze found him, steady and unflinching. "You all know the organization," Alaric began, voice low but resonant, "has always been built to last. But longevity requires foresight, and foresight requires succession. Cassius will lead when the time comes. Not now, not yet, but when I step aside, He will carry this family forward. The murmurs ran through the room like ripples, some approving, some cautious. Cassius felt his chest tighten. Recognition, yes, but also the first, subtle weight of expectation. To be named successor was a gift, a triumph, but it was also a burden heavier than any weapon he had ever held. That night, as he left the meeting, a sleek car slowed at the curb, tinted windows concealing intent. The passenger rolled it down, a well-dressed man with a polite, calculated smile. "Mr. Drummond," he said, "a moment, if you please." "Alone." Cassius followed, curiosity prickling through his nerves. The conversation was brief but loaded, an offer of alliance, a chance to operate independently, to expand influence without waiting for Alaric's approval. The words lingered, intoxicating and dangerous. For the first time, he felt what it might be like to act on his own, to be recognized not as a shadow, but as a force in his own right. It felt good, but the glow of that moment dimmed quickly. Back in the office, Alaric corrected a decision Cassius had made regarding territory negotiations, citing outdated intelligence and asserting authority with calm precision. The correction stung, a reminder that, no matter his accomplishments, he was still tethered, still Alaric's man. Small resentments began to grow like cracks in stone. Orders overridden, suggestions dismissed, subtle jabs at overconfidence. All reminders of the hierarchy he had once revered. Every act of control that Alaric exerted, no matter how justifiable, began to feel like chains. External pressures mounted as well. Rival families tested boundaries, whispers of federal interest filtered through loyal eyes, and a junior capo, ambitious and sharp, began watching Cassius with an intensity that made him uneasy. Each threat, each challenge, required careful navigation, and with every decision, Cassius felt the dual weight of his own ambition and Alaric's shadow pressing down. Late that night, alone in the dim glow of his office, Cassius stared at the map of territories on the wall. The crown Alaric had promised was not a symbol of honor. It was a burden, heavy with expectation, with responsibility, with danger. And yet, somewhere beneath the weight, a flicker of something else remained. The thrill of possibility, the first taste of independence, and the quiet, undeniable knowledge that the time would come when he would have to choose between loyalty and power, obedience and self. In the silence, the city outside buzzing with its relentless hunger, Cassius realized the world he had been trained to navigate was no longer enough. The crown sat heavy, but he could feel its shape forming in his hands, waiting for the moment he dared to lift it. Cassius sat in the dim light of the warehouse office, the hum of the city outside a distant pulse. The maps of territories stretched across the table, lines drawn in ink and ambition, yet they felt increasingly like chains. He leaned back, eyes tracing routes that promised opportunity, connections that could strengthen their position. "We're too static," he said, voice low, almost to himself. "We could reach further, secure new alliances. The world doesn't wait for us to be comfortable." Alaric's response was measured but firm, a hand resting on the table as if to steady the very ground beneath them. "Comfortable is not the same as cautious," he said. "Expansion is fine when you understand the cost. Rushing into unknown alliances is how empires crumble. We preserve what we have before chasing what we don't." Cassius's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to insist that progress required risk, but he held himself back. Not yet. This wasn't rebellion. It was tension, a silent friction that gnawed at his bones. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent, hungry. The weight of Alaric's control became painfully tangible when word came that Tobias, the young capo Cassius had mentored since his first days under Alaric, had been killed following an order Cassius had reluctantly executed. The message arrived coldly, a miscalculation, a timing error, an unavoidable consequence. Cassius stared at the empty desk where Tobias had worked, at the small notebook of plans he had carried with him, and the anger that rose wasn't just grief. It was the frustration of obedience, of being shackled by loyalty that demanded sacrifice. The meetings began in secret. Cassius spoke quietly with trusted capos, probing loyalties, exploring what independence could look like. He did not plot betrayal, not yet. Each conversation was careful, measured, a test rather than a challenge. But the room had a way of revealing truths. Whispers traveled quickly, and those attuned to opportunity sensed the shifting winds. Blood in the water, the sharks thought. Alaric noticed the change, as he always noticed the smallest details. But he misread the distance, attributing it to distraction, stress, the natural evolution of his protege. He doubled down, asserting control, giving orders more sharply, scrutinizing decisions that had once been routine. A hand on the shoulder, a curt correction, a lingering glance that was meant to remind, not punish. Yet each attempt to reinforce loyalty felt like a push against a wall. The more Alaric tried, the more Cassius recoiled, retreating into calculated silence. Late at night, alone in the quiet office, Cassius traced the maps again. Routes, territories, alliances. Each line carried weight, but now they also carried consequence. He thought of Tobias, of the narrow streets where he had once learned to fight, the moments that had shaped him under Alaric's watchful eye. The world was changing, and so was he. Frustration had grown into unease, and unease into a subtle, dangerous clarity. The empire that had nurtured him now constrained him, and the cracks forming in the foundation of loyalty were beginning to widen. Outside, the city did not notice, did not care. But inside, in the dimly lit office, Cassius felt it, the slow fracture of everything he had once trusted, and the first stirring of a path that could not be undone. Cassius stared at the reflection in the glass, not really seeing himself, but a version he had tried to deny for months. The man in the mirror was sharp, composed, dangerous, a perfect soldier shaped by years of lessons, corrections, and unrelenting expectation. The eyes staring back carried a cold precision, a measured calm that masked a storm inside. He had learned to follow orders, to anticipate consequences, to wield power like a surgeon wields a scalpel. Yet beneath that mastery, a question throbbed like a pulse he could no longer ignore. Who was he, really, beyond Alaric's design? The realization hit hardest in the aftermath of a decision he had made alone. A rival family had pressed hard on their eastern territories, attempting to exploit cracks in loyalty among the lower capos. Alaric had planned a slow, methodical response, strength measured and carefully distributed, but Cassius acted differently. He convened his own team in secret, reorganized defenses, cut off supply lines, and turned the rivals' advance into a trap. By morning, their territory was secure, the threat neutralized, and the capos whispered in quiet awe at the precision and foresight Cassius had demonstrated. Alaric's praise, when it came, was tinged with hesitation, almost disbelief. "You handled it well," he said, choosing his words with care. "Better than I would have expected." But Cassius saw it, the subtle flicker of doubt, the faint shadow of a man beginning to feel his own control slipping. That night, Cassius returned to the reflection, the mirror cold and unyielding. The face staring back no longer belonged to a boy grateful for guidance. It belonged to a man who could outthink the teacher who had raised him. He realized with chilling clarity that Alaric, once the anchor of their organization, was now a liability. Stubborn, principled, bound by habit, Alaric's brilliance was tempered by inflexibility, and the world outside their walls did not forgive hesitation. Every delay, every insistence on old methods, threatened the empire they had built together. The city hummed below, unaware of the silent war brewing within the office walls. Cassius traced the edge of the glass, his reflection fractured by the shadows of the night. Loyalty warred with survival, gratitude clashed with ambition, and every instinct screamed a single, undeniable truth. If the empire and his own future were to survive, Alaric could not remain in control. He thought of Tobias, of streets wet with rain, of lessons learned in the dark, and of the first spark of independence he had tasted in the car with the rival family. That spark had grown into a flame. And now, as the weight of choice pressed down, Cassius understood the scale of what he must do. He could continue to serve a man who would never relinquish control, or he could seize the path that had always been his to claim. The man in the mirror looked back, unflinching. Perfect soldier, Alaric's creation, but also something more, something raw and hungry, ready to step out of the shadow and decide for himself. The crown of responsibility pressed against his shoulders. For the first time, Cassius felt its weight not as a burden, but as an inevitability. Cassius moved through the city like a shadow, unseen but always watching. Meetings were held in muted back rooms, quiet bars, and abandoned warehouses where the air smelled of dust and smoke. One by one, he called in favors, made promises, and tested the loyalty of those who once served under Alaric's unquestioned authority. Every word, every gesture, every calculated pause carried weight. He had learned this from Alaric: how to command attention without shouting, how to bend men with subtlety rather than force, how to plant ideas and let them take root. The coalition grew steadily, a network of quiet strength woven from the threads of old alliances and new temptations. Kapos whispered in his presence, some in awe, others with envy, but all moved with the careful respect that came from understanding competence. Cassius handled each with precision, balancing encouragement and caution, reward and threat, just as Alaric had taught him. And yet, every step forward left him sleepless, haunted by the consequences of his ambition. Nights were spent nursing a whiskey glass, staring at the ceiling, the flicker of streetlights through the blinds casting distorted reflections across the room. He felt the weight of every life that could be touched, every decision that might ripple into blood. Alaric noticed his distance, of course. A rare evening, the quiet broken by the sound of Alaric's steps, brought the mentor to Cassius's door. They sat across from each other in the dim office, cigars burning low, smoke curling like ghosts around them. "You've changed," Alaric said quietly. His voice carried no accusation, only observation. "The boy I trained is here, yes, but something else too. I see it in your eyes, Cassius. That fire. It's not just survival anymore. You're thinking beyond me." Cassius swallowed hard. Guilt knotted his chest. He wanted to say nothing, to avoid the confession of thoughts he could not unthink. But Alaric leaned back, eyes softened by an unspoken vulnerability. "I've made mistakes," Alaric admitted. "Decisions I should not have, men I could have protected. I've carried the weight of them every day. And yet, I keep going. Because this empire, it demands it. And because I believed, once, that you could carry it with me." For a moment, Cassius wavered, the weight of loyalty, affection, and the man who had raised him pressing down. But then Alaric leaned forward, voice sharper, unmistakable in its finality. "I'll never let you go," he said. "You're my greatest creation." The words were a revelation and a verdict. Creation, not son. Property, not partner. Every lesson, every bond, every shared moment suddenly crystallized into an unyielding truth. Alaric had never intended to release him. He had trained a successor, not a partner, and the responsibility, the path, the inevitability now rested solely on Cassius's shoulders. The choice had been made long before he admitted it to himself. The network of whispers and promises, the careful plotting and preparation, had a purpose that now felt irreversible. The city pulsed below, indifferent, but in the office above, Cassius understood that the final steps toward power, survival, and independence had begun, and that nothing, not even the man who had taught him everything, would stop him. The night was thick with fog, the streets slick with rain that reflected the harsh glare of neon signs. Cassius moved with precision, each step measured, each phone call timed, each ally positioned exactly where he wanted them. The plan was in motion. What looked like chaos to anyone else was a symphony of calculated moves, every note composed from years of observation, lessons learned, and instinct honed under Alaric's exacting eye. He had orchestrated a meeting that would draw Alaric out, framed to appear as though a rival family had gained an advantage. One of Alaric's most trusted lieutenants, unaware of the duplicity, relayed the fabricated intelligence, bringing Alaric to the location himself. Simultaneously, Cassius had neutralized the supposed threat. Bribes, diversions, and subtle intimidation ensured that the rival family had no power to interfere, leaving only the illusion of danger. Every detail had been accounted for, and yet, the tension felt real, electric, unavoidable, like standing at the edge of a precipice. Alaric arrived, eyes sharp, aware, moving through the shadows with the same confidence he had always wielded. He surveyed the space, noting discrepancies, sensing patterns, calculating risk with a predator's instinct. Cassius watched from across the room, hidden partially in shadow, feeling the tight knot of anticipation coil in his chest. Alaric's gaze flickered, brief and almost imperceptible, and in that moment, Cassius saw recognition, the first inkling that the mentor understood the shape of the trap. There was a heartbeat of silence, a pause pregnant with unspoken words. Alaric could have turned, could have called for backup, could have walked out and unraveled everything. But he didn't. Pride, or acceptance, or perhaps something closer to love restrained him. He stepped fully into the room, deliberately isolated, and Cassius knew the inevitability had begun. Every element aligned, the fabricated threat neutralized, the allies in position, the hierarchy manipulated to perfection. Cassius emerged, deliberate, calm, every inch the student who had surpassed the master. His voice, low and steady, carried across the empty space. "It's time." Alaric met him halfway, a flicker of sadness in his eyes, but no fear. He did not reach for a weapon, did not call for reinforcements, did not hesitate. There was an acknowledgement in his stance, a quiet concession that the world they had built together had become a world in which he could no longer lead without being surpassed. The rain outside tapped against the metal roof, rhythmic and cold, echoing the pulse of inevitability in the room. Shadows stretched across walls lined with maps and memories, every mark and line a testament to what had been accomplished and what was about to be undone. Finally, they faced each other, two men bound by loyalty, ambition, and love, separated only by the invisible line of power now drawn between them. Words were unnecessary. The weight of years, the lessons, the betrayals, and the devotion all hung in the air, thick and unyielding. The room had become a crucible, and both understood that whatever happened next could not be undone. And in that silence, Cassius saw the final truth mirrored in Alaric's steady gaze. The trap had sprung, the moment was his, and the consequences, inevitable, intimate, devastating, were about to unfold. Cassius stepped fully into the dim light of the office, the space heavy with memories, shadows, and the cold certainty of what was about to unfold. Alaric rose slowly from behind his desk, eyes locking on his protege with a mixture of fatigue, resignation, and something that felt eerily like pride. The years of mentorship, strategy sessions, whispered lessons in the dead of night, all of it had led to this moment, and both men understood it. "You've gone far," Alaric said, voice low, steady. "Further than I ever imagined. And now," he paused, letting the weight of silence hang between them. "You stand here, above me, ready to do what I thought you would never consider." Cassius's hand rested on the gun at his side. His heart raced, yet his movements were precise, deliberate. "You taught me everything," he said, voice taut with emotion. "Strategy, control, patience, ruthlessness. You made me the man in front of you. I know exactly what I'm doing, and that's why this has to happen." Alaric studied him, a faint, wry smile tugging at his lips despite the gravity of the situation. "I made you who you are," he said, almost softly, as though it were both a confession and a statement of fact. "All of it, the brilliance, the cunning, the fire that drives you. I put it in you. And now," he shook his head slowly, "I suppose I see the consequences." Cassius's chest tightened. The love he had felt, the loyalty, the gratitude, the respect, it all collided violently with the necessity of survival and ambition. He had delayed long enough, hesitated more than his instincts allowed, but every test, every preparation, every sleepless night had led here. "I know," he said quietly. "That's why this has to happen." The room seemed to contract, the walls closing in with years of shared memories and the weight of inevitability. Alaric's gaze was steady, calm, and in it, Cassius glimpsed not betrayal, but understanding. The pride, subtle and painful, was there, acknowledgement that the student had surpassed the teacher, that the lessons had worked perfectly, and that the world they had built demanded evolution, even at such a cost. Cassius raised the gun, breath measured. His finger hovered over the trigger, aware that the act would be both shocking and inevitable, intimate and final. Alaric did not flinch, did not plead, did not attempt to intervene. There was only acceptance, a quiet surrender that made the moment ache with tragic inevitability. The shot rang out, echoing in the office and against the walls lined with maps, plans, and memories. Alaric's body slumped slowly into the chair, eyes still open, a faint smile lingering as if he had glimpsed something he could not have expected. Cassius lowered the weapon, hands shaking slightly, the weight of action settling on his shoulders. He knelt beside the man who had been mentor, father, and architect of his very being. The room was silent, save for the rain tapping against the windows, a soft percussion to the emptiness that followed. Cassius's reflection in the glass caught his eye, and he saw not only himself but the ghost of Alaric in the shape of his own resolve. The act was done. The lesson was complete. The future, heavy and uncertain, waited outside. The office felt impossibly large now, the desk massive and cold beneath Cassius's hands. He had taken Alaric's chair, the weight of authority pressing down like an iron crown. The smell of cigars and aged wood a stark reminder of the man who had built this empire, and of the price paid to inherit it. Orders were given with calm precision, rival families placated with subtle threats veiled as negotiation, and the whispers of unrest carefully redirected. Every move had been anticipated, every reaction calculated. The empire survived. It even prospered. Cassius had framed Alaric's death as the result of a rival family's overreach, a convenient story to unite his men and prevent fractures. The capos followed without question, their loyalty to the organization and to the symbol of its continuity, outweighing personal sentiment. To the outside world, the transition was seamless. To Cassius, it was hollow. The machinery he had mastered now ran on ghostly fuel, memories, obligations, and the weight of a mentor's absence. He walked the halls late at night, past empty offices and quiet rooms where Alaric's presence still lingered like smoke. He handled problems with efficiency and clarity, yet each decision left him restless, the ache of solitude pressing heavier than the empire itself. Power had come, but it carried no warmth, no joy, only the relentless echo of responsibility and regret. A young man approached him one evening, eyes wide and hungry, carrying the restless energy of the streets from which Cassius had once emerged. He reminded Cassius of himself, years ago, reckless, desperate, fierce with instinct yet unrefined. The boy's gaze held something familiar, an unspoken plea for recognition, guidance, and validation. Cassius studied him, a flicker of nostalgia crossing his features, and realized that the cycle had begun anew. The empire demanded a successor, and the weight of shaping another life pressed down on him just as it had pressed down on Alaric. Later, Cassius returned to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place where he and Alaric had first found each other among the rain-slicked alleys and discarded crates. He stood alone, hands gripping the edge of a wooden beam, the memory of that first meeting, the promise, the fear, the spark of possibility, flooding back. The man he had become, the decisions he had made, and the life he had claimed all collided in that moment, leaving him trembling, hollow, and profoundly human beneath the veneer of power. The city stretched endlessly outside, indifferent, alive, and unaware of the burdens carried by those who ruled its shadows. Cassius stared at his reflection in a cracked window, the dim light catching the contours of a face both familiar and foreign. He saw Alaric's ghost in his eyes, the echo of mentorship and bloodline, and the faintest hint of himself in the cold steel of his expression. He whispered, almost inaudibly, to the memory of the man who had made him, I'm sorry. Outside, the Empire thrived. Inside, Cassius felt the sting of solitude, the hollow ache of achievement, and the bitter uncertainty of whether he had truly won, or simply traded one cage for another. The crown was his. The price, infinite.